We've got a comeback story in LA, and we also have a quarterback controversy in Hollywood as well. Should be interesting, and we appreciate Matt Zemek being here from Trojans Wire to help us break down USC football. Matt, how you doing today?
Still really busy. Not as busy as I was a week ago with Clay Helton getting fired, but still really busy because now we have a quarterback controversy on top of a head coaching search, and we're only done with 3 weeks. This is going to be a long year.
It's going to be a long year, very interesting year. So I made the comment to you before we started to record that if somebody asked me before the season what quarterback is the most secure in his job before the season start, Keaton Slovis would be on that short list, if not number one. All right, he threw a couple passes, left the Washington State game. Trojans go down 14-0. If anyone is familiar with the ascension of one Jackson Dart even before this particular game, very interesting story about his recruitment out of Utah and his prominence in high school football as he became a elite quarterback kind of out of nowhere. Matt, just fill in the blanks in regards to how this all unfolded on Saturday.
Yeah, well, I might add that since Jackson Dart is from Utah and Utah let him slip away, well, Utah could use Jackson Dart now that Charlie Brewer left the program. Just an amazing confluence of plot twists in the Pac-12, including USC, but now also with Utah. But anyway, so USC was down 14-0, and Jackson Dart, he committed 2 turnovers. Like, it wasn't a perfect game, but he shrugged off those turnovers. And the key moment in this game, and we'll see how big a moment this is in USC's season. Last minute of the first half, just under 40 seconds left, USC has 4th and 9 at the Washington State 38, down 14-0. Now, I know a lot of coaches, both in the college and pro ranks, who would just punt the ball. They'd have the mentality, let's get to the locker room, we'll talk to the guys, we'll fix things, just get this done with, punt it away, not take the risk. USC interim head coach Dante Williams, no. We're going to try to score. We're going to try to just do everything we can. And it really proves the point, Mark, that in coaching, coaches so often lose sight of the reality that your decisions in many ways often send a far bigger statement than any speech, any collection of words, any session at a blackboard. Do you trust your players to make plays? Do you trust that the coaching you did in practice during the week leads to bold decision-making, which says, I have faith in you to make this play? So USC goes for it on 4th and 9 from the 38 instead of punting, and Jackson Dart throws a beautiful downfield strike to Gary Bryant Jr. for a touchdown. What happens next after it's 14-7 at the half? USC blows the doors off in the third quarter, 28-0. And USC had a really tough time under Clay Helton scoring touchdowns in the third quarter. Didn't score an offensive touchdown in the third quarter against San Jose State. Came out flat at the half against Stanford when Stanford built that 42-13 lead midway through the second half, which caused the exodus of fans from the Los Angeles Coliseum and led to Clay Helton getting fired. The third quarter was in many ways Clay Helton's Waterloo at USC. So what happens in the first game after Clay Helton? 28 points right out of the gate in the third quarter. You think coaching makes a difference? And it all stems from the interim coach, Dante Williams, trusting Jackson Dart with a 4th and 9. He makes a huge play, and the team just, went out like gangbusters in the second half. Like, you could just see the emotions, the attitude, the belief completely change on that USC sideline. This was a team that got pancaked in the first 1.5 quarters, trailing 14-0. Washington State dropped a touchdown pass and then got stopped on 4th and goal at the 2. Could have been 21-0. But as soon as that touchdown pass got completed, there was a sense, you know what? First of all, Jackson Dart is made for this. He's not the moment isn't too big for him. And second, wow, his teammates are going to rally around him. It's exactly what happened in that second half. Washington State didn't score a point in the second half. USC scored 45 straight. So it was truly a 180-degree moment right then, just before halftime.
Got Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire. Please check out his work covering USC football and the drama that ensues at both the head coaching and the quarterback position as USC takes on Oregon State coming up Saturday night. Matt, so now we've got Keaton Slovis, which, of course, just a couple of years ago, he entered a game and took over and threw 30 touchdown passes that season in much similar fashion. So now we've got a quarterback controversy of sorts. How do you shake it out yourself? How do you think it will be determined? What do we know about the injury status of the players as well?
Yeah, it's so fascinating because both Keaton Slovis and Jackson Dart are dealing with injury issues. Now, Keaton Slovis obviously got knocked out of that game in the first quarter against Washington State. Dante Williams, the interim head coach, said that he would be able to practice. He said on Sunday he'd be able to practice this week, and that news came fairly soon. So, like, Keaton Slovis seems reasonably healthy. I mean, not 100%, but certainly healthy enough to practice. But then Dante Williams said on his Monday night coaches show for USC that Jackson Dart was day-to-day. And, he was limping throughout that Washington State game. He took a helmet to the knee, and he was limping around, and he wore a knee brace coming out of the locker room at halftime. Didn't have the knee brace on in the first half, but when he came out of the tunnel for the second half, the start of the third quarter, yeah, he had a knee brace on. So, Dante Williams has a question in terms of he's really not evaluating how good these guys are. He's really evaluating their health this week. That's really the foremost consideration. I mean, Jackson Dart is almost certain to be the guy in 2022, especially after this performance. I mean, USC has some other really elite quarterback recruits coming in, such as like Devin Brown. There are others in the pipeline. There's also, of course, Miller Moss, who is a backup on this year's team. But Jackson Dart clearly stamped himself as the likely starter for 2022 at this performance. And of course, Dante Williams, he's not likely to be the head coach in 2022. We'll see if he's on staff or not. He's obviously auditioning for whatever job he can get, whatever job he wants. At least, to the fullest extent possible. So he has to take care of Jackson Dart's health. He has to think long-term about Jackson Dart and making sure that he's not being overextended, that, maybe this is a week where he has to pull back and rest. And it's a very tricky situation, as you could imagine, Mark, because, USC, this season is still just beginning, and you want to win the Pac-12. You want to go to the Rose Bowl. But you know that if you're Dante Williams, you're not going to be in that head coaching chair almost certainly. And so you have to just make sure that you take care of your players. And that's really the best thing you can do, not just for your players themselves, but also in terms of, if you're going to interview for another job, you want to have that reputation. You want to know that if you're going to be recruiting somewhere else, that players are going to say, oh, he had Jackson Dart's back. He was looking out for his best long-term interests. So that's part of the very tricky calculus. It's really not a quality of performance advantage in practice. It's really going to be more of a health evaluation in practice this week. I think that if Jackson Dart is reasonably healthy and USC does its vetting and makes sure that medically Jackson Dart is okay, he'll get the start. But we have to wait and see about that first.
Folks, please like the video, share these videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the content, others will as well, and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. We got Matt Zemek on the line, so you also head on over to Trojans Wire and check out his work. His insight into the USC football team is obvious here, so you get more from Matt at Trojans Wire. Before we move on and continue the conversation regarding the head coaching situation, a couple things that stand out to me in reviewing this game against Washington State would be Drake London, of course, has been one of the elite receivers on this team, but he's been waiting to be that number one guy, and he's having a tremendous season, and in particular in this game, 13 for 170 and 2 touchdowns. What did you see from the USC offense? Because the other thing I see that could be a little alarming was Jackson Dart not only took it over from a passing standpoint, but he led the team in rushing, and that's not necessarily sustainable.
No, it's not. And the running game is a complete disaster. But the thing in the moment is establishing a number 2 receiver behind Drake London. That's really a huge key, because we have to keep in mind this was Washington State, and USC's best half of football last year in the pandemic season was that first half against Washington State. Scored 28 points in like the first 15 to 20 minutes. So really very similar to this game. And USC has to avoid feeling that like, we figured it out, we've arrived. No, it was only Washington State. Almost all the remaining Pac-12 opponents, maybe the exception of Arizona, also Colorado, but everyone else other than Arizona and Colorado, like certainly Oregon State. Oregon State is going to provide a much better test and a much better gauge of where USC actually stands. So the Trojans shouldn't get full of themselves for beating Washington State. A lot of people are going to do that this year. But I think the first priority, really, the running game is such a mess that you can't really make that like the number one priority. That is a long-term fix. The short-term fix is to get a reliable number 2 target, because you're going to have better defensive backs going up against Drake London. You're going to see teams doubling Drake London and daring Jackson Dart to look at the other half of the field, look at other options. And so USC needs to have that second guy. And it's worth noting, Mark, that Brew McCoy was supposed to be the number 2 wide receiver behind Drake London this year. He got into trouble in the offseason. He's not likely to play for USC at all this season. That's the status of his situation. That's the severity of the trouble that he got into off the field. So there needs to be a number 2 guy to take the place of McCoy. Could be Taj Washington, could be Joseph Manjack, but it's a very fluid situation. It was impressive that Dart was able to establish such a great rapport with London right off the bat. I mean, obviously Drake London's an elite receiver, but the quarterback still has to get him the ball. Jackson Dart did a better job of getting the ball to Drake London than Keaton Slovis did. And that itself raises a question of why was Dart able to be so prolific and productive in the passing game and Keaton Slovis wasn't? Graham Harrell, the offensive coordinator, said that he admired Jackson Dart's gunslinger mentality. Well, why was Keaton Slovis not similarly aggressive? Slovis was injured last year, so we who cover USC thought, all right, he's healthy this year. So now you're going to see the passing game become more vertical, more aggressive, more ambitious. It didn't happen under Keaton Slovis in the first 2 games. It took Jackson Dart to come in and really establish that kind of identity. So that in itself raises questions about Graham Harrell's offense and the way his air raid system is coming along. It's a credit to Harrell. You referenced that this has happened before at USC with the whole JT Daniels situation. Keaton Slovis was on the other side of the divide. Remember that 2 years ago against Utah, Keaton Slovis himself got injured. Early in that Utah game, USC had to turn to third-string quarterback Matt Fink. He beat Utah. I mean, he was prepared for that game coming off the bench after an injury to Slovis in the first quarter. So that's a direct parallel with this. Slovis getting injured early and another quarterback lower on the depth chart being ready to play. So it's so weird, Mark. Graham Harrell has his backup quarterbacks ready to play in a pinch. But in terms of cultivating like the main quarterback, having him able to play extremely well over a full season, that's what Graham Harrell has not been able to do at USC. It's a really weird convergence of realities here.
Folks, we've been attempting to build a USC channel here at the Voice of College Football for quite some time. We were on a pretty good run for a long time, build up about 500 subscribers, but have not been able to flag down a consistent contributor. But we believe we've got one here with Matt, so we would ask that you would subscribe to the channel and spread the word about what we do here. And certainly head on over to Trojans Wire and check out Matt's work covering USC with Oregon State coming up and the Trojans at 2-1. Another statistical oddity here with the Drake London showing of 13 catches is that nobody else on the team caught more than 3 passes. And again, when I talk about something sustainable, that is not necessarily the case. Elijah Moore at Ole Miss caught like 85 passes last year. Nobody caught more than 20 for Ole Miss, but it usually doesn't work that way. All right, Matt, when we go back to the head coaching situation, Dante Williams certainly, at least again, we can temper the optimism with knowing that it was Washington State, but still, you really brought to light a situation where he had to make his first and most aggressive big game in the game moment decision, and it worked. So that was key, because it could have gone off the rails, as you outlined, very quickly against an inferior foe. And then there would have been all sorts of, calls for a coach to be in here immediately. But he's put himself in a certain place. So any further thoughts? People check out the video that we cut with Matt last week, but he certainly did a tremendous job of breaking down, as we had a conversation about the likely candidates for this job. But anything else on the coaching front that you think needs to be brought to light?
Well, I think, the Dante Williams, I think his ceiling, if he wants to stay at USC, is defensive coordinator. And I think he certainly took a forward step in that regard. Now, obviously, the decision he made was as a head coach, not as a defensive coordinator, allowing Jackson Dart to get that 4th and 9 play late in the first half. But nevertheless, it shows his leadership. It shows his good game day judgment. So he certainly took a step in the right direction if he wants the USC coordinator job, defensive coordinator job, under the new head coach. But I still think that being head coach is out of the question, because USC has a tortured, tangled history with the idea of promoting an interim head coach. That, after all, is what Clay Helton was in 2015 when USC elevated him to the permanent head coaching position. So I still think that Williams' ceiling is defensive coordinator, but he took a step toward that. Like, he came closer to achieving whatever goals he wants in the coaching marketplace. So that's significant. And I think we talked last week about, the defense. Like, if you're a defensive guy such as Luke Fickell, you need to be strong on the offensive side of the ball. So Cincinnati's offense did not look very good against Indiana. And I know that Cincinnati came back to win that game, but for anyone who's following various USC head coaching candidates with their teams this season, such as Luke Fickell, you will know that if in that game against Indiana, Indiana's All-American linebacker Micah McFadden was ejected on a very dubious targeting call. And after that play, Indiana's defense wasn't nearly the same. The replacement had a huge drop-off. Indiana didn't generate nearly as much pressure. McFadden is not just a strong and tough player. He's also is a very high football IQ player. So Indiana's defense experienced a huge drop-off with McFadden. Before McFadden was ejected for targeting, it was a mismatch. Indiana's defense was all over Cincinnati's offense. The Bearcats were not able to do anything. And so, if Mike Bohn is looking closely at that game, he'll see that Cincinnati won, but he will know, if he's doing his homework, that a Luke Fickell offense, that is a point of concern if USC wants to bring him over. And another interesting story in terms of along a very similar line is that Tony Elliott, the offensive coordinator at Clemson, he's been mentioned in this search. He's also a potential hot name if, like Miami fires Manny Diaz, who is in serious trouble. Elliott's going to be part of that because he's in the ACC. He's close to Miami geographically. Obviously, Clemson is a program which stands for success under Dabo Swinney. Tony Elliott is tanking his stock as a potential head coaching candidate. When you look at how bad Clemson's offense has been, it's gonna come across as, it might be unfair, but it's gonna come across as, well, Trevor Lawrence left, Travis Etienne left, and they don't have good replacements. So Tony Elliott is picking the wrong year to have a down year in terms of the coaching market. So I think his stock definitely took a downward move if Mike Bohn at USC is considering him. I think the top three is still pretty stable: Fickell, Franklin, and Matt Campbell. I think that's still the top three. Again, I don't have a precise order, but I certainly think that's the top tier of realistic candidates. And the other candidate of note who's going up, the candidate who really rose over the weekend, Kalani Sitake of BYU. Now get this, he's not just 3-0. He's beaten 3 teams in the Pac-12 South. BYU is the Pac-12 South champion already. So BYU's beaten Arizona, Utah, and now Arizona State. I would think that would give Sitake at least a look from Mike Bohn. And here's this, Mark. Here's the topper. Guess who USC plays in its final regular season game on November 27? BYU, Kalani Sitake. That could be an audition for the job.
Vegas did not learn its lesson with Utah visiting BYU 2 weeks ago as a touchdown favorite. BYU physically, the game was close on the scoreboard, but physically was the superior team in that game. They turn around as an underdog again against the Pac-12 South team, Arizona State, by about 3 to 4 points. They take that game in hand as well and win it. So huge wins by BYU. They are 3-0. To your point about the Clemson offense, struggling to get past Georgia Tech, couldn't even mount 300 yards of total offense in that game, didn't run the ball or pass the ball well, and barely escaping Georgia Tech. And it is interesting to note, because I saw most of the Cincinnati-Indiana game, is that people will walk away thinking, okay, Cincinnati won by 2 touchdowns. Indiana did have the ball inside the Cincinnati 10 with about 2 minutes left to play, down by 6 points to take the lead. They fumbled. And to your point about Micah McFadden, Cincinnati was averaging just over 2 yards per play when he left the game, and that shot up to 8 or 9 yards per play after he left. So inside the game, you got to take a look, certainly when you look at these scores and results on Saturday. No question about that. Got Matt Zemek on the line from Trojans Wire, breaking down USC football in the Pac-12. So, Matt, I'm going to give you my take on the Pac-12, and then you can take it away from there. I think it's a very odd season of results and perception by the Pac-12, because I think if you grab the average college football fan on the street and say, what about the Pac-12 this year? They'll say, oh, wow, the Pac-12 has jumped back into the mix. Oregon beat Ohio State. Man, what about that UCLA game out at the Rose Bowl against LSU? Because those were the 2 games that everybody paid attention to, rightfully so, especially the Ohio State game. But overall, the Pac-12, I've run the numbers, 16-16 out of conference. And while that sounds like, okay, well, that's mediocre, you got to take into account those are FCS and Group of 5 games largely, and you better be winning 85 to 90% of those games. They had a 5-5 week 3, and basically across the board, a ton of bad losses in this conference. But the flag bearer right now, Oregon, got the win in Columbus. So if Ohio State has an Ohio State season, the perception might be really good, but the depth of the league might be worse than it's ever been.
I completely agree. And here's the thing. Right now, the Pac-12 has become the ACC of the past few years with Clemson and a bunch of nobodies. I mean, that's really where we are. And the thing is, if Oregon does make the playoff, the struggles of the other teams in the conference are going to be, if not necessarily forgotten, they're certainly going to be minimized, because the main banner headline from the 2021 season is Pac-12 ends 5-year college football playoff drought with Oregon. I mean, that's going to be the number one story. And let's even keep in mind, Alabama, there were years like 2016 in particular. In 2016, I don't know if you remember this, Mark, but all the non-Alabama teams in the SEC in 2016, they all lost at least 4 games. Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, they all lost at least 4 games. Auburn made the Sugar Bowl, lost at least 4 games in that regular season. It was Alabama and the 13 Dwarfs. But who cared? Alabama was there and played a classic championship game against Clemson. So the SEC's weaknesses and flaws didn't get banner headline treatment. It's missing the playoff. That's what really leads to ridicule and humiliation. In the Big 12's case, it's still not having won a single college football playoff semifinal. The Pac-12 did that when Oregon beat Florida State in the first year of the playoff. So if Oregon does make the playoff, a lot of these things get minimized. But if Oregon doesn't make the playoff, it is an absolute disaster, because you've seen the Pac-12 North go 1-5 in week 1, with Washington losing to Montana, an FCS team, at home. And now you have the Pac-12 South going 1-5 in week 3, with Arizona losing to an FCS team, Northern Arizona. It's Arizona's first loss to its in-state neighbor up in Flagstaff since 1932. And Arizona, Colorado looks like a game in which the loser, could be 1-11 this season. Colorado fortunately already banked a win over an FCS team in week 1. But so you could have Arizona and Colorado both go 1-11. And of course, UCLA had that upward momentum and immediately junked it against Fresno State. And to add to the Pac-12 humiliation angle in that game, Mark, Jake Haener, the quarterback of Fresno State, who just torched UCLA's defense, he used to play at Washington. And Washington could certainly use a much better quarterback than what it has right now. And one could also say that Jake Haener was smart to get out of there before the house fell down in Seattle. So just everywhere you look, there are embarrassing stories. And now, of course, you have Utah with Charlie Brewer leaving that program after 3 games. We don't know if he's going to transfer yet. He hasn't placed his name in the transfer portal at the time of our recording, Mark. So it's so many bad stories. But if Oregon makes the playoff, most people are going to forget about it.
Yeah, another hit to the Pac-12 that I'll extend on the point that you made is UCLA losing that game takes away the possibility of a pristine Pac-12 championship game. Not that I don't think anybody in their right mind really expected everyone to play all the way through with no losses, but again, it tags UCLA with an early loss where they look like clearly the better team or the best team in the Pac-12 South. With an opportunity for a really nice record entering a Pac-12 championship game. But now we're fully in conference play for the most part. 3-9 is the Pac-12's record against the other 4 conferences, plus those BYU games. So that's not looking good. Really, we only have those couple games against Notre Dame left for Stanford and USC, plus the BYU contests that you cite against both USC, and they do play Arizona State coming up here in the next few weeks, I believe, BYU. Or they just played. That's what we just talked about. Just already got the win against Arizona State, but they've got USC at the end of the season.
Yeah, just to hit on your UCLA point, Mark. Oregon plays UCLA in the regular season, and it really would have been great for the Pac-12 if those 2 teams were unbeaten heading into that game. And of course, that's the Chip Kelly against Oregon angle. If both teams had been unbeaten, that would have created a real national splash. And the Pac-12 needs those kinds of splash moments, and now it just got deprived of one. So that's another big hit relative to the UCLA loss, which you smartly brought up.
Appreciate the conversation here with Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire, and check out his work. Anything in particular that you're working on this week, Matt?
Oh, hey, we're covering a coaching search and a quarterback controversy. Other than that, not much going on. One of the things that's actually been really good for us at our website, Mark, is that we're covering the Pac-12 in addition to USC. And one of the things that's really gotten a lot of readership is that with Miami's situation potentially leading to a coach firing at the end of this season, Mario Cristobal, I don't think he's leaving Oregon. All right, let's just settle that. I don't think he's leaving. But if there is one job he might leave for, it's Miami. Played there, won a national title there. He's a native son. So if there is a job that could lure him away, it is Miami. So I've written about that. I've podcasted about that. And I'd like to give a shout out to my own podcast producer at Trojans Wire, Ian Hest. You find him on Twitter, Ian, H-E-S-T. He's a Miami Hurricanes expert. So I just talked to him about the Miami job, the Cristobal situation, lots of great insight, lots of detailed information. Ian doesn't think Cristobal is going to go to Miami either, but it's a really interesting topic of conversation with Manny Diaz in huge trouble at the U. It's well worth checking out on our site.
Great stuff, Matt. Enjoy the conversation. It should be rather intriguing. We've got a college football season like we haven't had in quite some time. Clemson shaky, Ohio State, Oklahoma. I love it. I love to see other teams in the mix and us having no idea what's going to happen.
Hey, if we get another 2007, bring it on. Let's have that.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, Matt. Enjoy the conversation. Enjoy the games as well this weekend, of course.
As always, thanks for having me on, Mark. Great to talk to you.